All right, folks. So I thought we would just I'll say a few words about the topic of transference and what we're doing here, and then I'm going to hand it over to Maja, who's going to talk about transference in a not so scary context, and then we're going to show you a video example of it. Although there's so many, but I'll just say that as we were preparing for this topic, on our instructor call yesterday, there were so many subtopics that we could have gone into. This is a huge area. It's very relevant. It's a very deep, rich well when it comes to healing. We're going to keep it a little bit more general, kind of an overall conversation around it, and then we're going to actually have a part two to this, where we're going to pick one of these topics and just really take a much more deep dive into it, right? So for right now, this is going to be more general, and if you've not trained with us at PSI, you're going to kind of learn how we orient towards it. The other thing I'll mention is that I was a little surprised when you all did the poll, and I think it was a little over half of people said that they had some formal training in working with transference. I will say that when I present this work to graduate students, almost nobody has experience with it. Unless you're psychoanalytically trained, psychodynamically trained, people barely have heard the term. And we think that, again, it's a huge player in therapy, it's a huge player in psychedelic therapy. So our goal today is to communicate how important this is when it comes to healing, when it comes to symptom resolution. Working with the relational level of people's wounding is essential, right? The vast amount of experiences that cause people to enter into psychotherapy are not single event, non-relational traumas. They're things that have happened to us in our family of origin, typically in childhood, typically in early developmental windows that we have. And so when it's that kind of material, when it's those types of events, where the trauma happened in relationship, that means relationship is encoded as part of the traumatic memory, and it will come out as part of the traumatic memory. It'll come out in the therapy sessions, the psychedelic therapy sessions, or at least it should come out. It's coming out one way or another, whether it's overt and conscious or if it's covert, right? The big takeaway that I think we want to communicate is just how much potential for healing there is when we're engaging in this layer of people's process. Okay, that sounds good enough for the kind of a general intro. Maja, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay, so everyone here in the panel, please contribute to what I'm saying, add to it. So I used to do non-directed play therapy. I worked as a youth therapist and worked with a lot of little kids in a playroom. And so transference was the name of the game whenever we were in the playroom. And I never needed all this training on transference when working with little kids. And now all of a sudden it's this massive understanding and undertaking when you're working with adults. So I wanted to share a little bit about what it looks like when you're working with kids, because kids access transference so easily. It's very intuitive, it's very bottom up, it's very primary, and they're able to when you set up the container, right, where the playroom is ritualized, there's rules, there's boundaries, you share the rules and boundaries as you enter into the playroom with the child every single time, to the point where they're like, why do you keep repeating that every time I come in the playroom? Because we want them, it wants to be ingrained. This is the container. And then within that container of the playroom, as you enter into the door, you get to be in your imaginal realm. And one foot is grounded in real life, in the rules, in the boundaries, and one foot you get to play in fantasy and the imaginal realm of transference. And so all of a sudden, within that safety and within the grounding of reality, their imagination can begin to flourish, and their access to transference, bottom up transference, primary transference, it gets to be brought into the room. So that's when the child then brings in teddy bears as daddy and mommy. I might now have a transference of like good mom, good dad, cop. Often I would get the cop role, the bad cop that's taken mommy and daddy away from them and now they're in foster care. And so, right, so I'd be handed a cop's hat and asked to be put on a cop's hat. And then they'll grab a teddy bear and teddy bear's daddy and they run after daddy and hug daddy. And so all of a sudden the room has become this playground to process the transference that's been mapped as a result of the trauma. And it's very playful, it's very loving, it's very fun for the child. They get excited going into the playroom, right? Us as adults, when we go into a lot of these sessions, we're terrified. And yet, so what's the difference between us as adults and then children able to access this so deeply and so richly and process through immense amount of trauma within the playground realm? In addition, what is it as clinicians that we can allow children to and give them permission to come forward with such profound negative transference and just have fun with it, right? I'm not, as a clinician, batting that negative transference away, saying, no, I'm not the bad cop. I'm the good cop. I'm here to help you. We let them bring that negative transference onto us. We play that role and we validate their feelings. We validate what's going on for them. You're mad at me. I can see you're mad at me. Yeah, you're mad at me, right? You can say that you're mad at me and really give them permission and it's freeing for them and it really allows them to move through things quite quickly with again within the right container and within the right solutioning, and we'll talk about solutioning later. Some children it doesn't work for, and we'll talk about we can explore that later on as well. So that's the introduction. Is with children, it's fun, it's playful, it's nonsensical, and yet it's very intuitive and very emergent and very biological. So
Okay, perfect. Yeah, right? It just happens. I think um, just hearing you talk about that, I'm like, oh yeah, yeah, like you get to be whatever for this child, and it's not threatening. That's the when you brought up this example on the instructor call, I was struck by how little charge there was in my system around when you were talking about it. So.
mhm.
But let's get to the adult version here. And again, I think we can pick pretty much any video, any piece of video to go into this. But we've got a little 7-minute clip here, and I think it'll be self-explanatory what's going on here. And Daniel, if you need to hop on and say anything about it, please do. Let Jean know.
Okay, so I'll just build out the context for the video just so it's easier to kind of follow and understand how we got to this point. I think one thing to name, I've been working with this client for about 14 months, maybe the initial 2 months. When he started the work, he was quite under-resourced, poor coping mechanisms, and little solution. So the first 2 months we spent building out resourcing. The following 2 months, we're specifically working on solution. And then we went into the SI container for, what is that, another 6, 7 months before we opened up the door to negative transference. So we'll go into some of these details later on, the practical aspects of transference and when to open up the negative transference and the strategic pieces around that. One thing I would want everyone to follow as you're watching this video is um, how the positive transference, how the initial connection we have in the relationship starts to devolve or evolve into the negative transference. And just watching that unravel and open up and take up space in the room, in the relationship, as well as how the negative transference is maintained and not altered as it comes up. So those are the things I would suggest to track as you guys are watching this video. Some emotion.
Fear.
Mm-hmm.
Fear kind of shooting up through the center of my chest. A tightening of the chest. A sensation of trying to catch my breath.
Okay. And notice how you're feeling towards me as you try to catch your breath.
Neutral.
Mm-hmm. How do you imagine I feel towards you?
Caring.
Okay. So fear, catching your breath.
No longer neutral towards you.
Okay. Yeah. How are you feeling towards me, Patrick?
Anger
Mm-hmm.
and connection.
Okay. Let's be with both. Connection would be here no matter how angry you are. And is there something that I did or might do that makes you angry at me?
Confusion.
Uh-huh. Stay with all of it. Anger, confusion. Arms are shaking. It's coming up there.
How I needed you.
Mm-hmm.
Needed you for
Yeah. Yes. It makes sense you would be angry at me.
It's so lonely.
Yeah. How does it seem like I'm reacting to your needs right now?
Like they're just bouncing off of you.
Yeah, feel into that, buddy. Watch that. How your needs are bouncing off of me. More anger.
You don't care about me.
Stay with it.
Needed you. You don't care about me.
So I'm gonna just say that phrase back to you. Patrick, I don't care about you. See if there's something else coming up here outside of anger. It's like your arms coming closer to your body.
Your body feels like it's like absorbing that.
Okay. Yeah. Notice what that feels like. As you absorb my lack of care for you. Notice what it's like to be you as you absorb that. There you go, bud.
There's no one.
Yeah. Yeah. Stay with it. I'm seeing how there's no one here for you when I don't care about you. I'm seeing how alone this leaves you. How alone I left you. Legs pulling in. You could trust this place and see where it takes you. And I might not care about you, but I will see where this takes you. I will keep seeing. I'll keep listening.
All right. Daniel, do you want to say anything about that before we move on?
I guess if you guys were tracking how the negative transference was unraveling, especially as the meat of it started coming to the room and onto me, I didn't provide any type of solution till like the very tail end of it, right? There's the what was it before that? I don't care. The needs bouncing off of me, that I don't care about him, how alone it leaves him. And I'm just letting that flow through so that he gets immersed into that nightmare before I let him know that I'm seeing how it's impacting him, or that I'll continue to listen to him or hear him. At least providing solution in a more explicit way, because there's of course the attunement and the relationship that's happening in the background.
Yeah. Yeah, you were really not rescuing him from this world that was emerging in his system, this uncaring, relationally uncaring world that was
Mhm.
emerging. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Daniel.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, folks, let me say a couple of things about the the big picture of transference, and maybe we can reference this example here. But essentially, what's happening here is there is I think how healing works for human beings is that we have this giant reenactment impulse, and it's to take us back to the place where we got crushed, right? And so there is a world that's emerging here in this in the client, right? There, it's an implicit reality that's hanging out in this person. Let's just say that it's back here, and it's not available to their conscious mind. It's living in dissociation because it was probably overwhelming and too painful. And what we tend to find is that when things have happened to us that we don't have an answer for, we don't have a resolution for this, meaning that, we, to some degree, we're still living in this war zone and it's not over. Like, for example, abandonment, as a child. And so what tends to happen is that there's an impulse to reenact the scene of the crime, and that reenactment just shows up in a lot of places in our lives. It shows up in intrusive imagery, the intrusive imagery that's part of PTSD, when your mind just keeps giving you flashbacks of the traumatic event. John Breyer, who developed the trauma symptom inventory, the way that he writes about this is that he's pretty convinced that that is the brain's way of putting this material right in front of you, so you're forced to engage with it. Right? We think of it as mental health looks at it as a symptom to resolve, but there's another way of looking at it as a healthy impulse to go back into this and engage, where we got crushed. Other ways that we tend to reenact, right? Maybe some people on this call, you ran away from your family when you were 18 years old. You couldn't wait to get out of there, and you got away. You lived your own life. You started your own family, only to completely reenact the same exact family system that you ran away from, and except for this time, maybe you're playing a different role in it, right? So that we tend to reenact that way. Being attracted to partners who have elements of your parents, sort of the painful elements of your parents. We tend to either be really phobic against it, in which case it becomes sort of a shadow element that we tend to play out, or we're just, we head right into it. That's what we call chemistry. And, I often think like that should be like an element of dating websites. Like, what's the family structure here that you're being attracted to? And then, of course, transference, which is essentially just transferring, transferring past relationships onto present relationships in your life. Yeah. We're basically asking somebody in our present day life to play the role of somebody from our past. Yeah, I think it's as simple as that. Let me see. So I think the last thing I'll say about this, and then I'll open it up to the panel here, is that the way that you can, I think a helpful way of thinking about this is that, you and we all have our own scene of the crime that we have internalized. And that scene of the crime is, it has, information about what happened to us, how intense it was, what we wanted to have happen to us. And the big piece, especially if this scene of the crime happened repeatedly, if it happened in your family of origin, then the memory of it holds relationship. Yeah? And so the way we think about the scene of the crime in the PSIP world, in the PSI world, is essentially that, our systems are trying to resurrect this whole scene, and it really doesn't matter what role you play. Meaning that, there was perpetration in that scene of the crime, there was a perpetrator, there was a victim, there might have been an observer who saw what happened, but maybe they couldn't help, or maybe they chose not to help. And then sometimes, if we're lucky, there's somebody who was a savior, somebody who did help. So the way we think about transference, or at least traumatic transference in the PSI world, is that there are these 4 roles that tend to emerge with trauma that are part of the scene of the crime. Again, it's victim, savior, perpetrator, and observer or bystander. Yeah, and so your client has those roles inside of themselves, and they're walking around, and anytime they get into intimate relationships, their more primitive aspects of their brain body basically start to hand these roles out to the person you're in a relationship with. And so it's a little sad when you think about that, the closest person on the planet to you, maybe your spouse, let's say, is the one, because of the intimacy, because of the closeness, that's the person that you hand most of your negative transference to, right? And it's the strangers, the people that you don't have intimacy with, so they're not entering into that family transference with you. They're the people that get spared. They're the people that typically don't get that kind of negative transference. It's intimacy that generally triggers this from taking place. So, the therapist, definitely an intimate connection, right? A very close connection. So there's a lot of transference that can happen there. And then, the other people in your lives that are closest to you, maybe your work relationships. Yeah. So maybe I'll pause there and just kind of hand it over to the group here and see what people want to do with that.
Just based off of what you were just saying, I just wanted to share from my own journey how much, my 30-year marriage, and how much I would just struggle that couldn't hold my husband's attention, like that I couldn't get him to like be with me and attend. And I know this is all about Dad. Like I know it inside and out. And he does do things to play into it. And I'd worked on it with so many kinds of therapies. And just finally, like that has shifted and eased from being able to work with the transference in medicine in this kind of work. It's been such a relief, for my husband. Even if he's distracted or getting up or going, like, he's not getting oh, this huge negative anger or shutdown that I would do. And so I just say it's from the inside out. And as a couples therapist, I've seen that for 30 years too, until we can unpack it. And it doesn't happen up here, right? Even though I know it. So anyway, that's what I was thinking of. Like, phew, so glad it's been so much better for my marriage.
Yeah, I like what you said there, Robin, that transference doesn't happen up here, right? It is not a conscious process. It is a unconscious process. It sneaks up on you. It's bottom up, right? And typically, the more trauma we have, the stronger the transferential field, like the thicker the projections tend to be, the more charge there is to what happened in those past relationships. Yeah.
It's important at this point in the conversation, at least, to acknowledge that the countertransferential realm that complicates going to these places for many of us, because I think that the complexity of doing transference work and taking those roles willingly that people hand us pushes on the places inside of us that object to being seen as bystander or object to being seen as perpetrator. And so what we can start to confront as we get into this work, and perhaps our unwillingness as a field to do this work, particularly on the West Coast, is like it's revealing something about the projections that we hold inside of us, and the injuries and the longings and the frustrations. And some of the work that I've been really influenced by in thinking about this, conceptualizing it, is Dr. Karen Morota's work. She's a psychologist who does a lot of kind of psychoanalytic theory, but her hypothesis is that we're disposed as a field of clinicians to want to be good, right? To want to take the role of the savior because of some sort of like wish fulfillment fantasy that we have from being parentified as children, and this desire to regulate the person across from us as if they are our parent, because then maybe we'll feel good and we'll get closeness. And so in the purpose of trying to reenact something with our parents, with our patients, it makes it very, very difficult for us at times to take on the role of the bystander, to see the person suffer, to even contribute in some way to their distress, right? Contribute by allowing them to have what's inside of them, that it can be very threatening to those places inside of us that have built a whole career around being good and healing other people so that we can affirm our sense of being the rescuer or the savior or the good child who was over parentified. So I think that maybe even as we're having this conversation now, it's useful to notice the reactions that you have inside of you around holding the projections from people. Like when we talk about each of these roles, as Saj mentions, the perpetrator, the bystander, the victim, the savior, we might notice inside of ourselves that we have deliberately created and chosen our interventions, our theoretical frameworks, our set of clinical skills specifically to avoid holding some of those projections. And as you were listening to Daniel's tape, you likely heard, right, his level of comfort in staying with, or at least openness. I mean, I couldn't speak for what it felt like in his body, but his openness to being able to hold those stories, to play that role, to enter into that script. And that really demands perhaps more flexibility from our nervous system than we're used to in a field where we have organized our career identity around being the good savior. So notice your reactions, notice what feels tricky. I mean, often the things that I think are dead giveaways for us in terms of the countertransferential response are like how we need to come in and defend ourselves or disprove a client in their statement to us, when clients, on medicine or not, are saying things like, well, you weren't there, right? And how quickly we move into saying, no, 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 I was here the whole time. I was seeing everything, right? How much we move into rescuing essentially ourselves from the discomfort of being labeled that way, the intensity of what's happening inside of our body, the quickness with which we need to defend, how much we need to disprove what they're handing us, again, is usually a dead giveaway about some of the places inside of us that need to be explored and have been unexplored and might be impacting what we're not willing to do, where we're not willing to go with our patients.
Thank you, Hillary. It's reminding me of a book that I absolutely love called um, uh, Power in the Helping Professions. I can't remember the name of the author. It was a 1970s book, and it's a book of warning. It's warning clinicians about the power and the helper role, and how if it's overdeveloped, it's managing the other side. And I love that book, and I wish it was there's more updated versions and etc., because I think it really explains it well. And he doesn't even talk about it from a traumatic point of view. He just says if you are habitually reinforcing yourself 8 hours a day in a helper role, the other side of the dialectic is going to get consolidated and want to come out somewhere else in your life, right? You will not, and if you're continually in that place, you will begin to feel uncomfortable with acting out the other side. So it becomes this compulsion to continue to act out the helper role more and more and more. And you see this even, actually, there's studies done with kids. So cops and robbers, like cops and robbers is a dialectic between your good helper savior and your villain, perpetrator, right? And there's actually a study out there that looked at very sociopathic murderers, people who have the most severe criminals, and they were looking at their trauma history. They're like, clearly, there's a trauma history here that must be linked to some of these mass murders and severe criminals. And what they actually concluded in the study, it was actually a lack of play in the kids' childhood, because without the lack of play, they can't hold the dialectic. And what the parents were doing were forcing the children into a savior role, forcing the children to be severely what's the word, performance oriented, right? There's no room for play. It's severe performance oriented. You must be good. You must be good at this, and there's no room for anything else. And you're to do what you're told. And so what would happen is the other side of the dialectic would begin to become the obsession, right? And the compulsion that would want to get acted out. And in addition, there would be no room for rage, there'd be no room for anger. And so you have this consolidation of the dark side of the dark side of the archetype, the perpetrator, the villain aspect that emerges in play. It doesn't have a place, it doesn't have a safe place to be acted out, combined with the underlying rage of protest, like, no, I don't want to do what you're told. No, I don't want to perform. I don't want to be the savior. I don't want to have to, etc., begins to become obsessed within the unconscious and then gets acted out. So whether the study is actually true or not, but that's what's out there in terms of some of the research.
I wanted to piggyback on what you were saying, Hillary, in terms of countertransference. I think especially when the client is deeply in the negative transference, it's such a delicate space because they're hypersensitive. Their system is hypersensitive to you, right? To what you're, not only what you're saying verbally, but also what the nonverbals, right? Any slight shifts in movement, shifts in your tone of voice, right? So, and then that can, right, then make us anxious, right? Feeling, I know I felt this before, like, okay, I need to really be on my game here. I need to be perfect. I need to really be tuned in to what's going on. I need to really be, empathic. And then that can, make us nervous, right? Because it's such a delicate space. So, it's so important that I think we all know this, right? Just to really regulate ourselves, right? And take that pressure off of us. Okay, don't need to be perfect here, right? Whatever happens is just grist for the mill, right? And just more material to be worked with, like if we're not perfect, right? So I just wanted to say that too. It's such it can be such a delicate space.
I want to make a link between the play therapy you were talking about, Maja, and the adult version. And you emphasized the container, the rules, and so on. And in PSIP, we emphasize our own version of that, which I find so important and helpful to make it all work well and to give us room to not be perfect and all of those things. And it involves just a big chunk of it is open conversation about the topic right from the get-go, that this is a big part of what we do in PSIP is negative transference and positive transference. And this is how it could play out. And, Daniel talked about a really well thought out and necessary progression of the container for his client, that before they got anywhere close to transference, they're making sure there's enough resourcing and solution, and and so because it is often where we go the deepest in our trauma, we really need to make sure that all the pieces of the container are in place, including the therapist doing their own work, so that they can hold those very difficult perpetrator roles, or any of the roles really, but often it's the perpetrator role can be one of the toughest.
Would you guys suggest that maybe there's 3 or 4 things to a holding environment that allows the nervous system to bring this transference forward in the client? One is the container, the rules, the boundaries, right? The psychoeducation, the clinician doing their own work to give the client's nervous system permission to bring that negative transference, and then solution. Is there enough solution on board with the individual's real life to allow for this? I'm kind of curious about those 4 kind of pieces. Would you guys agree that that's what's involved in creating that container?
I wonder how this would fit into your categories. You can help me with the thematic analysis of that, but I'm thinking about the implicit allowing that happens when we don't rush in to defend. So that might fit into the category around the nervous system tolerance around that. But I'm also thinking about the explicit communication of saying, I want you to be able to tell me anything that comes up for you about how you feel towards me and what's happening between us. And that's okay with me, right? Sometimes at the beginning of sessions, I'll actually say to people very explicitly, anything that's inside of you, I want to be able to see and work with and have it come forward. And none of that feels scary or too much for me. I want you to be able to have whatever's inside that you've been alone with out here, so that you can have a chance to work it out, including if that means something about me and us.
That feels deeply like the relational psychoeducation, full permission, right? It's top down, but it's very empathetic, top down, whatever's here is I give permission for it to be here.
Yeah, and to me feels like part of the maybe even boundaries container conversation. Right, okay, it's signaling to someone's nervous system and the unconscious. It's okay for you to come forward. It's not too much for me. I'm not afraid. You're not going to have to tuck that away here. And I think people respond well to knowing we're inviting of it explicitly.
Yeah. I think there's something to the ritualization of sessions, the initial ritualization, even taking the medicine. And you'll hear instructors, especially Paula, who's a former instructor, who will have this speech she will say every single time she does a session, which is sort of part of the boundaries, right? So you're taking the medicine, you have this sort of relational piece orienting to the clinician, you have this song and dance you might say in the beginning that all ritualizes the space. And you do that with kids when you're doing play therapy. And I kind of see that also an emergent property of the container. We're setting the container, we're setting the boundaries, we're offering a little bit of psychoeducation, taking the medicine, it's all ritualized. So there's a ritualization aspect that I think initiates or evokes the space, the rites of passage into the transferential realm.
Well, you can say all that in secondary consciousness, and that doesn't mean once the medicine comes on board that they feel safe at all around that. So it's a process. But in terms of those 4 things, Maja, I think that the safety and that they have outside of, and the trust they have in their resources outside of the container are important, but also really takes time to develop the safety between us, that it is okay to say that, to speak to it, or even notice it. And so, yeah, I can talk later about the progression of that. But that's foundation. Like Daniel said, it took months before this could really emerge. So
I don't know if we should talk about that later. I think that's pinnacle to maybe bring like pulling on that a little bit more because I think it's absolutely critical what you're suggesting, Robin. I don't know if we do want to postpone it to later. It seems really
I
important.
think other people may have something they want to say about that first.
Well, I'll just throw in quickly, part of that, the psychoeducation conversation also is, I think it's really helpful to include how the transference might leak out into your day-to-day life as well. You know, when I working with a client, I'm telling them that we're going to start with a lot of positive transference first. We're really going to work on building in a lot of that trust and safety that you're talking about, Robin. But that makes, you know, I just really explicit. That means that I'm holding the, you know, the good parent role essentially, and bad parent might be passed over to someone in your life, like your spouse and so on. So that's an important part of the discussion too.
I wanted to chime in and just, I think an important distinction that how we're approaching this in the PSIP world versus I think how it's traditionally approached in psychodynamic, psychoanalytic traditions is that, you know, transference is a primary consciousness thing. It's a bottom-up emergence of memory that we're not conscious of, right? And so I think what traditionally the psychodynamic folks look to do with it is to have it emerge and be able to talk about it, be able to have it enter language, be able to have interpretations of what's going on here, right? And so they're, in that sense, they're taking something that's implicit and making it explicit. I think the real important distinction that with how we're approaching it is that we're attempting to keep it as much as a bottom-up, visceral, primary consciousness experience as we possibly can. So, in other words, when, for example, one medium through which the transference really kind of flares up and spikes is sustained eye contact, right? So if you're sitting there and the medicine's on board, or even without medicine, and you're just like having the client look into your eyes, their bottom-up process is going to bring up all sorts of relationship. You know, they're going to project right onto your face, and it's going to be a visual projection. It's going to be an emotional projection. They're going to have fear that, you know, you're going to do something to them. All sorts of things are coming up as a visceral experience. So my personal sense is the more we can keep that transferential process in the realm of the nervous system, I think the more effective we are at processing it, rather than having it come up and then having like cognitive interpretations around it. So I think I'm just adding that to the fifth thing to your list, Masha.
Yeah, I love it. It's like without the bottom up, you can know everything. And maybe this is part of what we're seeing is maybe clinicians are learning about transference. So they have a head, you know, a cognitive understanding of transference because they've learned it in school. But that bottom up, real sense of, oh wow, I really feel my own transference onto you isn't getting done. So this is where we get to have the real experiential sense of it, which is, I'm assuming, Saj, this is why one of many reasons why when people go through the training, they go through the apprenticeship of that bottom up experiential space first. So they're guinea pigs, their nervous systems become guinea pigs to really feel in to the transference. So then they get it from a bottom up place. And then you loop in the cognitive.
The way that I think about it is, you know, if we're going to deepen into the negative transference, we need to kind of have a little lay of the land. Like, okay, like Daniel's video is perfect for this, right? So I forgot how he asked him, but he was looking for, okay, what are you angry at me for? Right? Because if we're just going into the anger without any context, we can get a little bit lost. But then the patient said, I needed you and you didn't care. Right. So there we go. Right. There's the heart of the conflict. So we know, right, this is what we want to go into even more. So I find like when I'm working, it's often, okay, initially as we're entering into the negative transference, okay, I need to know the context. Okay, are the feelings about related to me? What's the relational context? And then we can go into, right, the bottom up material. Then we don't really need to keep coming back unless there's different layers of negative transference that comes in, right? But once we have that context, we then can go into the bottom up process.
Yeah, Jackie, I think you're bringing the respect to, there's something to be said for secondary, like to help with the container, to then give permission for a real depth into the bottom up, primary.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, or maybe like there's another layer to this. But my assumption is that everything is transference, like even the unwillingness to share, even the assumption that we won't be heard, which creates an inhibition around our disclosure, around our projections, our deep belief that we'll be disrespected. It's almost like there has to be some level of transference work that's happening that we're aware of, even before the patient's aware of it, that invites them to begin to trust us enough to tell us about the more kind of the gnarlier stuff and make it more explicit. Like I think my assumption is that we're always starting a clinical relationship from the perspective of either neutral or positive transferential projections, like working on creating enough safety. And that is transference work, which allows us to deepen into more and intentionally move towards more of the negative transferential work. But there's these kind of like, I often think about it when I'm working with folks in terms of like different dials that we turn. But I guess I don't know if there's any clinical material that's showing up in terms of felt sense, how a person is, what's inside of them as it relates to the relational field that isn't transference.
You know, Hillary, as I hear you talk, I'm thinking maybe it
Mhm.
would be helpful for everybody listening if we actually went into some concrete examples of what
Mhm.
this looks like. You know, and I know you're
Mhm.
saying it's everything, but let's like maybe like talk about like what does it t tend to look like for people? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, and
oh
oh, go
yeah, go
ahead.
ahead.
No. Well, I was just going to say at some point I can bring examples from the week I just finished in the apprenticeship. So there's some fresh ones and about that process and how it's the building of that over days. But you go ahead and finish what you're saying, Hillary.
Sure, I'll just include one really brief, obvious example to me is a person that I started working with, didn't really say much, but was having all sorts of somatic processes unfold as we were getting into the work. And it was a cannabis session. And after we were kind of sorting through that and the sessions that followed, and she was watching her tape and she said, there was so much going on for me inside, and I didn't really say any of it. And it didn't take much. We just like peeled at the corner of it. And I was like, you know exactly what that's like. That is so familiar for you, isn't it? Which was my kind of like hunch that this was in a reenactment. And she said that was my whole childhood. I was playing that out. I wasn't talking about the transference. I wasn't even describing the narrative component of it. But the fact that I had a whole world inside of me and I didn't and couldn't and wouldn't say anything. And it was just the most obvious thing in the world that I would keep it all inside. To me, I mean, to both of us, became very clear that that was transference in action, but it didn't sound like it. It didn't look like it necessarily because there wasn't any explicit work that we were doing, but there was a reenactment going on about what it felt like for her to be as a kid. So that might be a good example of the like first session right off the bat. Mhm.
Yeah, I think it takes time for them to even notice it, for us to pick up on it. Um, and even though it's important, I think, to say in the beginning too, before we start, that everything that's happening that feels like it's about now, it seems like it's between you and me or the room or something, you know, like just to know that's also going to be a handle to some kind of event memory, some biographical piece. And it feels so real in the moment that it's happening now. It's a sound that's happening outside or something in, you know, your voice. So it's important to set that up, but that doesn't mean they're gonna have that awareness. So just to give some examples this week, really with everybody, it was just initially, you know, asking questions about where I'm sitting, how close does that feel right? How does my voice sound? And really it's, you know, I think it's a couple of sessions of, and usually, right, sometimes it comes right up in the beginning, but usually, oh, it's fine. You know, if it's fine between us, it feels right. You can come a little closer, you know, like in a way, it's not registering high enough in the awareness of their process. And sometimes it's irrelevant. Sometimes they're in some, you know, internal journey where our relationship isn't even important in that moment. But I want to just be able to name that, you know, and check in about that. And how are things between us? And, you know, be able to ask. And either it's like, oh, they're fine, or yes, I feel you with me. You know, there's just not a lot of charge around it for a couple of days. It's what I found, you know. And then sometimes there's more ability, and I think this trust piece is important to build in before people can speak to and notice more of the negative, where there is a place to allow that actually some sense of really letting me in or feeling that I'm there in a way that like I'm listening, I'm there, I'm attuned, that it is okay to that I can handle whatever's coming up. You know, I think that happens implicitly through a few days. And certainly in this case, there was some more, you know, physical contact and wanting to be closer and tears around being heard or understood. Like some of that came first. But after all that, right, then it all starts showing up. And just some examples where, you know, that were coming up is one, like I misheard a word someone was saying. And it just sent them into, you weren't listening. And she goes into people hear what they want to hear, not what they're being said. I'm like, okay, how about like, is that between us right now? Can you say that to me? You know, to help her deepen. And how is that for you? Oh, frustrated. You know, can you tell me you're frustrated with me? You know, and then immediately it takes it from here down more into something more emotional or physical. Or then, you know, other things that come up is, well, you think I'm making this up. You know, you must think I'm making this up. Like that. And then again, just we can lean into her telling me that either, you know, I don't believe you. You think you don't trust me. That comes up a lot. Fears of I'm doing this wrong. I'm not doing it right. All these things they think are about now. And what Jackie was saying before, they're, you know, just sounds listening for my approval in my tone or my voice, or did I sound warm or not? And so we can just use those as handles to feel what it's like that I didn't sound approving. I'm being quiet. And allow them to really speak to what that feels like in their body, or what to say to me what it is that they're questioning. Am I too much? Oh, I don't want to. Oh, when I asked her to tell me, I'm frustrated. You're frustrated with me. Then comes up is, oh, I don't want to hurt you. And then to go deeper into those places about I don't want to hurt you, it just allows that material to come up right in the moment. And so those things will start to come up, worried about when we're going to end. There's not enough time for me, or you're getting bored. all these things that are really beautiful ways to start to deepen in the beginning. And as Eric was saying, at first, we really want to refuse the negative transference while really allowing and validating it at the same time. And that's a little tricky dance until we can get to the place where that Daniel was able to work with in that video with someone. But to be able to say, no matter, as incompetent as I am, as untrustworthy as I am right now, I'm still here with you. As angry as you are with me, I'm not going to leave. No, we can be together in this now. And that's the early dance. And so I just thought I'd give some of those examples because they come up all the time.
I think I have a simple example, Robin, of something what you're saying in terms of kind of building up to the negative transference, like holding the positive while holding both. I had a client who did not like it when I had my hair up. For him, it put too much negative transference on me. He felt like I was trying to gain power over him, and that really scared him. So I played the positive transference role, whereas in sessions, my hair would be down, and then he would feel so much calmer, right? That I listened, I was there for him. But so I offered that deep corrective for his nervous system. Okay, my hair's down. I'm no longer, gaining power over you. While at the same time suggesting, and at some point we may need to go into what it's like for you with my hair up. So sort of offering that, but giving him agency that he gets to choose when he's ready to go there. And either way, I'm going to be here for him. And so allowing that safety, building up that trust, recognizing the positive transference that he holds and the negative transference, and then slowly kind of building my way into the negative transference.
And I really liked what you said before, Hillary, about the transference is happening all the time. I completely agree with that. So it's not just in the middle of the session, right? It's, in phone calls or texts outside of the session, or it's as they're coming into the room or as they're leaving the room, right? That's such a rich space for transference material. And what I'm working with somebody right now where we're doing an intensive, so sessions every day over the course of a week. And there's a lot as we're going into more and more, or getting closer to, we're not in it yet, the negative transference. There's a lot of a fair bit of negative transference that's coming in outside of the sessions, right? Because their system is opened up, it's pretty sensitive, right? So it's not even just in the medicine session that it's arising. So important for us to really, be mindful of what's coming up outside of the sessions as well.
But can you frame it as transference when it's coming up outside of the session? Because then, they think can we work with it there?
Mm-hmm.
Without sounding like we're avoiding or being defensive or something.
There's something you had said, Eric, earlier about the way that we prepare people to anticipate the dribble out after the sessions that has me thinking about how important it is, and has been for some folks that I work with at the end of session, even if they're still in this like really disorganized place, to name that explicitly so that they can come back to it on the recording and hear on the tape, okay, here's what's happening, is this is how it's feeling. You might notice feeling this with other people, and we want to remember that this is connected to this place inside of you, and here's something, right, kind of to close it up, knowing that we can't ever actually close it up, but to give them some sort of like top down way of understanding what's happening, so that when they leave the session and they're left feeling that way, that they can go back and hear our voices and hear a little bit of our conceptualization, so that I think that minimizes how likely the person is, or not minimizes, but might just prepare them well to not be left floating in the chaos of the projection that's handed to everybody then. And then I think it can be useful for us as clinicians, again, in terms of keeping, like, honoring our capacity and energy and what's needed from us and what we're capable of, to be able to say to a person, like, I'm so glad that you're noticing this, and I want to remind you this is connected to our session, and you can go back and watch that tape and hear the things we talked about, and we will, like, of course it's alive in you, and we'll have more time to process it, and like, this is connected to that work that we did, and you can go hear it. And redirecting people back to that audio can be helpful for them and helpful for us.
You see, in tribal communities, like, they'll ritualize processes and in the beginning and at the end. And my belief is part of that is to keep the container clean, so it doesn't bleed into the community. Right? You'll see this with Native American when they go to war and they come back. There's a ritualization process that happens before they're allowed to come back into the community, and it's completely ritualized. And they do that because of the dangers, the hazards of that material bleeding out into real life outside of that container. So this is, again, I think, very intuitive, very bottom up, that these rituals have emerged. Um, the one thing so I'm kind of like writing down a list of what I'm hearing people say in terms of what allows transference to be contained and utilized and processed to the end. So I've got a list of ritualization, psychoeducation, really being bottom up, dealing with one's countertransference, so the relational trust that's there between the clinician and the client, and there's solutioning. And I wouldn't mind us touching a little bit on the solutioning piece, which I think the more solution on board, I think the easier it is for the client to really allow for that negative transference. I wanted to give an example. Again, it's play therapy example, because I find that people, like Sash says, we don't get triggered when we think about kids. So it can sometimes be easier for us to get the material. There is a child that was in a dysfunctional home, and he was doing, or actually it was a girl, was doing play therapy. This wasn't with me, with another clinician, and it wasn't going anywhere. And then over time, that child got moved to a very safe and loving foster home. And I think they adopted the child, and et cetera, et cetera. So more and more solutioning got on board. Okay. They went from extremely dysfunctional home. So there wasn't any allowance. The nervous system wouldn't give any allowance for any of that material to come forward in the playroom. And I think that the child was just picking up toys and, like, having toys talk to each other, and sort of this circular thing, but never looked at the clinician, things like that. And it was just repetitive. And then, so they ended up moving the child to another home. Well, the child ended up in the first session, I think it was first, I'm not quite sure, got up onto a table, grabbed like a ruler as if it was a gun, and screamed at the clinician to get down on his knees and not move. Right? So all of a sudden, all of that material came to life. Right? So if you think about it, what was the transference that the child was owning, perpetrator? And what was the transference that she had disowned, which was victim? And so the clinician had become the victim. The disowned archetype was the clinician, and she had owned the archetype of perpetrator. And at that point, the play therapy room had initiated and the process begun.
Now imagine if that was your adult client in a process doing the same thing, and how different that would be. Right? It's the same thing, right? It's things that happen to people in childhood, perpetration that happened in childhood that's coming out and expressing this way, but it lands so differently in our systems. We become so triggered, and so we have to do so much work to be able to to hold that kind of negative transference versus, when it's a child, we know like, okay, this is, we know, we have a way of contextualizing it. It's a child's mind that's playing out.
Yeah, I can speak to a personal experience of that. There's the client relationship where you can, like Daniel's example, really take it slowly and do all the things necessary to get to the point where you can go for the negative transference. But in the trainings we do, we're diving in. And I had a training where there was a participant who had really good solution, I think. She was a very experienced therapist. She had really good connection and support in her life and so on. And leading up to before we started any sessions, I had talked about transference and negative transference and sort of the the progression that works well, starting with positive and working towards a negative. And her system went into such strong negative transference right in the very first session. And it was my system received it very similar to a certain parental figure in my life from childhood. There was nothing I could do right, and we've already talked about how we've built our identities around being able to be the good helper, be the good savior. And there was nothing I could do right. My voice didn't sound right. The things I was saying weren't right. And I'm trying so hard to bring in some positive transference, some solution. And yeah, it was really pushing me to my edge of what was coming up for me. And, and we had 5 days it's a training. So we debrief and we talk about it, which was really helpful. And, so we sorted it out, but that first day it was such a good test for the unexpected negative transference.
Maybe this is a good direction to go, folks, that maybe talking more personally about what kind of negative transference do you have the most trouble with personally when you're in that clinician role, when it comes towards you, just like what came towards Eric. And it sounds like it was very familiar from your childhood, from your own scene of the crime, Eric, and that's why it landed so difficult. Right?
Yeah, and it was the tone she was using and the words. It was just
chef's kiss, perfect.
Robin, you were talking about how when we're starting, we're trying to build out that everything, and Hillary, you're saying everything is welcome here. You can tell me all of these things. Well, I was trying to hold that. My pressurized nervous system saying, yeah, it's really okay that you hate how I'm doing this. Just struggling to hold that both, and we got through it and so on. But
just feel how misattuned I am, how incompetent I'm being. Tell me about it.
Yeah, tell me more about how there's nothing I can do right.
Just hopeless. Yeah.
I think I had the most trouble with the bystander archetype, because in my family that was the thickest, that was the most. It's like the denial and the nothing to see here was so extreme. Raised in more of an upper class white family where everything's perfect. We have the white picket fence. Everything's perfect. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. Nothing to see here. So that when that emerges, it's always a hard one for me. So yeah, I can feel it's like, God, like some of this ain't their dissociation and they're sleepy. Some of it's mine.
I hate it when it comes up that people feel like they have to take care of me. Like I was clearing my voice and someone goes and they were like, are you okay? And maybe we need to shorten the session, or I'm too much for you. I'm too much, this is too much. This is a lot. And and this part of me, it's been the hardest one for me to really lean into being a victim. And then because that was so much stuff I couldn't tolerate with my mom feeling like a victim and how much I wanted her to stand up and do what she needed to in her life. And so that's been, so I have to breathe through that one to say, like, yeah, feel how helpless I am here. Like, what's that like for you? That I'm just maybe I'm too overwhelmed to be here with you. What's that like? That's been slow coming for me in a way to really be okay with that.
I've noticed how difficult it can be when somebody seems to be in active terror around me, their anticipation that I'm going to perpetrate them in some way. And the fear in somebody's voice and eyes and body when they're convinced that I'm going to hurt them, abuse them. And that to me feels like, on some level, I'm like, of course that would feel yucky to hold that. Like, I don't care where we come from. That feels like, we're probably not in this work because we want people to feel that way for whatever reasons, or because of our humanistic, if like thrust. But I think I can really trace it back to as well, like how scary at times it has been for me that I'm actually bad. Right. I think about the religious trauma aspect too, of having grown up being told by systems, right? What's at the core of you is evil. What's at the core of you is bad, and how there are still lingering places inside of me that identify with or have suspicion, I suspect, of feeling like, well, is what's coming out of me that I want to hurt people, that I can't trust myself. And so I think it touches on that. And yet there's a very funny little like hack around this that I'm much more comfortable with it now because of having done so much more of my work. It feels like, oh, I really trust, I've seen my heart, and my heart is good. Like, I don't want to hurt anybody. But at the beginning, I remember thinking about how really, like, any way of working with transference at all is a kind of solution work, because what we're saying to a person's system is what's inside of you gets to come forward. You don't have to be alone with that anymore. Like, you can actually play it out and we can do something different. And so I found the workaround for me was, even if I'm holding the perpetrator, I'm actually helping them. It's like, oh, and that helped me feel like, oh, I could trust that this was not me actually hurting someone. It was like, it was the only thing I could do to hold on to that like savior impulse. And he was like, no, this is solution. This is corrective. I'm still helping them. The lengths that we go to are amazing to be like, okay, but also that's just good clinical information. Like, if we have a really good sense of our skill and the theory, that to be able to say, oh, I can understand why this is actually therapeutic, which means I can trust it. I can relax into it. This, when I'm doing it skillfully with all of the right parameters, isn't hurting somebody. It's part of their pathway to organize their system into a different reality.
I love it, Hillary. It's just, boy, I'm sitting on my hands over here because there's just such rich territory. Um, yeah, and I think something that the way that we relate to it in the PSIP world is really like a foreground experience and a background experience. And I think that's what you were just referring to. So the foreground experience that clients are having with us is handing us negative transference, like perpetrator or abandoning parent or something like that. And then the background experience, the canvas on which the negative transference is happening is one of attunement, is one of deep tracking and being with and accompanying the client no matter where they go. So yeah, it's like it's like, oh, you're hurting me. But the fact is that they're telling us that, right? They're telling us that we're hurting them. They're telling us that we're abandoning them. So there's a dual consciousness in the client system where, the content wise, they're saying you're hurting me, but there's a background knowing that you're actually with them in this process. Because guess what? When this was actually taking place and somebody was abandoning them or hurting them, they weren't being attuned to, right? That definitely was not happening there. They weren't being deeply listened to and understood and seen and empathized with. So there is a real foreground background paradox that I think plays out in the PSIP sessions that is, I like how you put it, it's comforting and it's a redeeming quality, I think, of how we go into the negative transference.
Or if they protest. Oh, sorry. They did protest or say something, there were negative consequences, right, that were dire, right? And so to keep having them notice, I'm still here. There is no negative. Like, has anything bad happened so far with you telling me this? Notice we're still here, still connected. Even if you want me in the other side of the room or the house, that notice that hasn't gone bad. I think that's important.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to just I'm sitting on my hands too because this piece is so juicy. So it's reminding me two things. Saj, it's reminding me of the second apprenticeship I did with you, and it's also Hillary. You're reminding me of my own perp and how terrified I am of it because it's going to mean that I'm like bad to my core, an absolute monster. So I just want to touch on those two things. But Saj, I remember. So I did the training twice, and the second time Saj was my instructor. And I did it when it was like a group of 16, and then I did it when it was a group of 3. And being given permission to go into the negative transference, and Saj became the bad therapist. He became like the bad parent. It was so solutioning for my system. It was felt so freeing, that level of attunement and permission giving that I had never felt it. I could sense like, wow, like this is amazing. Something I'd been managing and managing and managing and managing my whole life finally had breath and room to speak and express from a bottom up way. Wow. So to give permission to have negative transference and there's no consequences blew my mind. So, and of course, afterwards, it completely destabilized because I had not experienced that before at all in my life. But that'll be for a different webinar. So I want to just add that piece. And then Hillary, I really resonate with my own countertransference can come up because I also have that deep core place that if people go deep enough, they're going to find out that I'm an absolute horrible monster. Like I am the sociopath of all sociopaths, and no one's going to love me, and I'm going to kill someone. Like, and that is so like, and so to actually begin to access that and have permission for that to move. But I've also had to have some sort of rational around it. Like, oh, I'm actually a good kid. I'm a good person. I have a big heart. I'm very empathetic. I had to kind of hold the other side of the dialectic to allow me to inch towards it. Cause there's still a belief that it's true.
Maybe this would be a good time to to hear from our audience and see if there's some questions that might kind of direct the direction here. Jean, you want to chime in?
Absolutely. So folks, we have the Q&A feature enabled for this webinar. So if you have any questions that you'd like to ask any of our instructors, then please submit your questions through that little box down there if you're on your laptop. We do have one here from Leah, and Leah asks, can you speak to when a client does not have enough solution built into their solution, how that might manifest? Or does that just mean there hasn't been enough resourcing in place beforehand? Anybody like to speak to that?
Just one thing that can happen is then they'll just start looping in that, where it might come up, or they might even speak to something that's here and then just dissociate from there, or, or just freeze up or go somewhere different, that forget all about that. So that it won't move anywhere. So yeah, then I guess other people can speak more to how to go back and build in more solution. That's one way you see it.
Yeah, I think you want to,
Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, you want to pull for, try and identify any positive solution that's there, or even neutral, right? So I've had clients where this happens, right? It's just all negative transference. And then I'm trying to pull for anything like, how does my voice sound? And nothing. Nope, nothing there. And then I say, okay, well, I want you to check in. Like, I'm not going anywhere, but if you just imagine me leaving the room, right? Would that feel better or worse? And they say, almost always. I think there's only been one person who said, no, I think that would be better, right? But almost always they say, no, I don't want you to leave. And then deepening into, okay, so feel into that. So there's something about my presence here that is good or is working for you, right? So you're trying to capitalize on even if it's a tiny, tiny piece of positive solution, right? Because just like Robin was saying, if you don't have that, if you don't have your foot, their foot in that positive solution, they're just going to loop in the negative transference, right? There's nowhere for that transference to go, right? You're not safe, right? So it just has to stay inside of them.
Playing with the physical space is an amazingly powerful thing sometimes for people. And yeah, they don't need to stay in voice contact, but even looking, turn away, turn your back to me. Yeah, move to the doorway, move out of the doorway. What's the space that's needed for you to be able to stay with your own experience and not be, and that builds a huge amount of trust. Sometimes just doing that once can shift things and move things too.
And Robin, you're talking about establishing solution with space, but proximity in the session, right?
And listening to what they need to be able to stay with what's there for them and not be just preoccupied with safety. And then slowly build in that there's more and more physical closeness that's not a threat. But we can't just jump over that step if there's that threat response.
I would to complement what you guys are saying is I might help the client explore outside of session ways in which they can build more solution. So just to give you some examples in my own world, like I like jujitsu. Well, it offers two things. It offers an interpsychic solution, obviously, even something like I can't remember what Jean said she was doing, but some CrossFit, like something that allows the muscles to feel stronger, can be an interpsychic solution. And like if you look at jujitsu, it's around a lot of savior protective people, so that there's this relational savior that gets projected out, which feels like solution. So then the negative transference can then go into the room. It can then come into the container, the therapy container, because the real world, or at least somewhat of the real world, is able to hold the positive transference. So orienting to their world and finding out what is available already or what could be put in place, like helping them access their own creativity, their own emergent creativity that's moving them. Like our nervous systems, our organism is innately creative. It emerges with creativity. It wants to have solution on board. So we can trust that, just like it's no different than us trusting the transference. We can trust our innate capacity to create our worlds, generate our worlds, so we can support the clients in helping them create solutions outside in the world. And in that way, then the container, the therapeutic container, becomes more and more a playground for the negative transference.
And I think too, anything that you can do to differentiate yourself, the therapist, from the caregiver, that's the abuser. So I'll share this. Before I even entered the training, the PSIP training, I was in PSIP therapy with a therapist, and the first session, it was all negative transference onto her. Like, it was really, really severe. She couldn't say anything right. She was definitely the incompetent parent. And she made a move that I'll never forget because it was so helpful as a learning tool for me. At one point she said, yeah, your mother wasn't attuned to you, right? So she's separating herself, right, from my mother, right? So it's kind of like a good cop, bad cop move, right? So anything you can do towards that, and it's tricky, right? You don't want to invalidate their experience or insert something positive about yourself that they're not really picking up on. But I find that way of thinking helpful, like anything you can do to differentiate yourself from the abusive parent.
That reminds me of an example with a patient of mine who had really chronic and enduring sexual abuse as a child. And as soon as the medicine would get into his body, I would become the perpetrator, and he would be very, very, very scared of me. And so it was actually something you had said to me, Saj, in supervision at one point, but where we ended up starting, just the beginning was, I want us to look at everything that's different between me and the perpetrator. And we spent many sessions doing that. But the first thing he said, and this will be graphic, so you're prepared, but he would say, "You're not putting your penis in my mouth." And that would be the first thing he would say over and over and over again for the whole first session, right? And it was pretty clear, given the kind of work we were doing, that was, and who I am and my body, and the kind of that was not even a remote possibility that would be going on. But that was what his system was afraid was happening and would happen. And so even just being able to notice, like, that's not happening right now, and for us to stay with that for quite some time was really significant. Yeah. And then it was like, oh, you're a different person. Oh, you're a different height. You're different eyes, your voice is different. We're here, we're not there, and kind of building out the two realities.
Mm-hmm. Can I just make a comment on that, which is to say that I love that example, because when you're looking at that from a rational mind perspective, of course, this cannot be happening, right? But it speaks to how powerful this regression back into this other reality is for people, and how strong the transference can be, right? To have transference onto Hillary about sort of male perpetration, obviously, right? But the client was terrified still. Hillary was still full-on perpetrator, which speaks to the fact that, I think gender doesn't matter that much. There's the factors of somebody's life doesn't matter that much. Like, we will find a way to project and to transfer onto whoever we need to.
Maybe as an extension of that, before we move on, I know it's kind of bringing up another topic, but this same client would also later in our work have a lot of sexual fantasies about me, and sexual transference, or what we might call like erotic and eroticized, the two kinds of sexual transference, erotic and eroticized transference towards me. And that doesn't surprise me, given that I was also the perpetrator initially, right? That there is this other element of that's showing up. And I hope there's more time to talk about erotic and eroticized transference in the future, because those are such important parts of people's inner world and working through their trauma.
Maybe it'd be useful for someone to talk about solution-focused ketamine sessions.
Eric, that seems like a cue for you.
Why does that seem like a cue for me?
Uh, just the papers you've written about it, like, the number of hours of conversation I've gone into this. Want to hear your voice in the conversation?
Well, um, yeah, sometimes the work is getting to a place where the solution, all the different solution strategies are maybe we've hit a wall with solution, and we can turn to ketamine and take a break from cannabis, so that ketamine without cannabis can help us work with taking in solution more easily. Sometimes it's a better bet for solution than cannabis in general. Cannabis really loves to go for the nightmare, and ketamine is a little softer and allows more opportunity to build in the connection and safety. And yeah, I don't know. I'm curious what others would say about it.
When taking off the selective inhibition, I think is often a huge part of that. For some people, that itself is so retriggering. And so in those sessions to take that container off so they can just, we can try to explore our connection without any of that, can really shift.
Yeah, and Saj and I did a webinar on solution, and you can find that on YouTube. And that was a ketamine session. And we had no selective inhibition, except there was still a relational context. So those of you trained in PSIP know that relationship is one of the 4 parts of selective inhibition. So you can't turn that off if you're working with a client. And if you watch that, or if you've seen it, there's plenty of pressurization happening without any explicit selective inhibition, just because we're there. And even the client's only on ketamine, and Saj did that session mostly by himself, and Saj is just working so delicately and looking for those little openings for where can we bring in more safety and connection.
There's a few ideas that I've consolidated about working with transference over the course of doing PSIP, and one of them is conceptualizing our ways of responding to the transference, how to work with it clinically, by thinking about different dials we can turn, as I mentioned. And the first dial is the corrective experience. And then, of course, there's a neutral dial, and then there's the negative dial. And I have lots of thoughts on all that. But I think the solution-oriented ketamine work as being a way of like really just turning the positive dial all the way up. And a way of thinking about that in terms of corrective is what's the thing that would have made everything different? Which means it requires us to be very attuned to what's needed. What's the thing that would have made everything different? For some people, it's I back the fuck up and I am not moving any closer at all because you told me to stay there. And for other people, I'm wrapped all the way around you. And the ability to know which one to do and how to negotiate touch and distance requires so much attunement, which I think is at the very forefront of what you'd said earlier, Saj, about how this is corrective in nature, regardless of if we kind of like are fumbling around a little bit or have to figure some things out. Is it never, ever, ever in the worst moments were we deeply attuned to and someone was really tracking our body and narrating what was happening and being with us in our reaction. But the idea of what's the thing that would have made everything different also requires us to know where's the person at, if developmentally, or to make some guesses, because teenage nervous system reactions need different thing than infant nervous system reactions. And so is the person even able to reach or ask? Well, maybe not. Is the thing that they needed to be able to have a boundary and express the full intensity of their no in some way? So thinking about it from that lens, as opposed to trying to go for where the charge is. I mean, sometimes that also happens, right? As people get what they need, then they can feel the intensity of the emotion of what it was like to not have it all of that time. Or, you know, there's a developmental sequence that emerges as people get the earliest need met, then their skill starts to like innervate is not the right word, but there's like the progression can happen in terms of what their nervous system is capable of. So it can very easily go from, oh my gosh, I'm getting my need met, to how come you weren't here? And that can happen in the context of one session. But that for me is helpful in terms of treatment planning or case conceptualization or decision making. Like, what would have made it different? And sometimes they know, and sometimes we have to figure it out with them.
I was with someone this week who was an 8-week preemie we were talking about, and we did a solution session. I asked her before, you know, what do you think you needed to hear or know right before this medicine's really coming on? Like, what would have been the most comforting? And because I couldn't have guessed it, but she knew, even though it was an infant thing, right? She knew it was something about that, because she was feeling the fear and terror of everyone around her. And what she needed to know is that you're okay. You know, you're okay. You're well. You're healthy. You're going to be fine. Right? And so and I'm glad she could tell me, because that came up a number of times in the solution session, and really makes a difference if they have words that they know would be helpful.
And then the other end of the 3-dial approach that you hinted at, Hillary, is in Daniel's video. He says to his client, yeah, I don't care about you. But if you remember the video, he first said, I'm going to say something to you now. So he's still holding a bit of both roles there, and you know, working with that negative transference so consciously. So it goes all the way from, I'm going to be the best caregiver you've ever experienced, all the way to, I'm going to hold the negative transference all the way, and I'm going to say the thing that it was your experience. Or
I want to throw out one more concept here. I don't know if I believe it, but I have a theory that if we normalized in our society the concept of transference, it wouldn't have so much charge, right? So like I shared my example of doing my apprenticeship with Saj, and I had been managing my own transference, managing it. And finally it had a room to have expression. Well, afterwards I destabilized severely because I became so attached to Saj, right? Because he was the first person that in my unconscious like transfers my, he's like, he gets it, right? So then you see this massive destabilization afterwards. And so I am curious if so many people are holding like trying to manage a lot of the transferences in their system. And then so then two things happens, like it doesn't have room to breathe, so it has extra charge in it, which then it is going to bleed outside of the therapeutic container, because it's just like, you know, they're just like, oh my God, what is this? Oh, this is a whole new world I don't even know. This is a completely different dimension, and it's so necessary as part of our psyche. And so there's so much, it's a raw, I would say, almost capacity that is needing to be nurtured and developed, right? It's a healthy raw capacity. Now traumatic transference is a little different, but just the realm of archetypal transference is a necessity for our development and creativity. And yet we have no room in our culture for it. We're not giving space for it. In fact, I think in some ways we pathologize it, and we inhibit it, and so therefore we inhibit our creativity. So I'm sort of curious about, I have a theory that if classrooms, if kids, if like we're removing play from classrooms, right? We're removing all of these spaces where transference is allowed and working with archetypes is allowed. And so then what happens when you try to contain the transference into the therapeutic container? I can imagine it's just gonna, it's like, wow, this is the first place ever. Like the biology is going, the instinct's going, this is the first place ever I can play in this role. And I could see it spilling out, spilling out, spilling out. Having to know how to nurture that and tame that and cultivate that and master that as if it's a skill. So.
Well, I mean, transference gets played out not just in the therapeutic container, it gets unconsciously played out all over the place. Yes, we're getting that. But there's other containers. There's the kink container, right? The sexuality container. I think my personal sense is sexuality is the adult version of play therapy, right? Of like, you know, you be this for me and I'll be this. And, you know, with safe words, you know?
Yeah, I could say like that's a realm of like conscious and unconscious, like it's a realm of play. And I almost think for like looping back to countertransference, like are we attempting to use our clients as a realm of play for our own transference world, right? So
well, this does get to a point, and I want to move back to sort of audience questions in just a bit, but I've been like holding this one, and maybe this is just like a personal thing that I find very interesting about this, but yeah, the sort of the dark side of the savior role, you know, the ways that, you know, therapists really do benefit and resource themselves from being in that one particular helper role. And I guess I thought maybe it might be kind of useful to talk about like what does that create in a client's life where they come to therapy and they get good parent every time they come to therapy, good parent, attuned parent, the parent they never got, and then they go back home. They go back home to chop liver.
I want to add another piece.
Yeah.
I want to add another piece to that complexity. So you have the dark side of the savior role and how it's used to manage and resource and et cetera, et cetera. You also have the dark side of the victim role. So if you have a clinician that's holding the dark side of the savior role with a client who is holding the power on the dark side of the victim role, like what kind of dynamic does that make? So reinforcing both sides would seem very strongly.
Well, and we're a very repressed culture here in the States, emotionally repressed, right? And I don't think it's a coincidence, right, that there's all of this acting out that's going on in our country. I won't name any names, but you know, compared to, I don't know, like Italy, where people like they're so animated, right? Their emotions are right there at their fingertips, right? They can freely express, right? They have a different set of problems, we could say, right? When I've traveled there, it's very disorganized, you know, just to get around. But yeah, just to underscore what you're saying, Maja. Yeah, big cultural piece.
Wanted to jump in and say I have to leave. I'm gonna go see a patient now. So thanks for inviting me into this conversation so I can continue and see all of you instructors and people on the call in another time.
Yay. Thank you, Hillary.
Yeah, good to see you, Hillary.
Thanks, Hillary.
Okay. Yeah, Jean, let's open it up to questions.
Yes, thank you guys for answering Leah's question. We have another one. This one's from Katie. Katie asks, I'd love to hear a discussion about how our work with longer term clients who have done other types of therapy with us before PSIP may influence the transference that comes up in the psychedelic sessions. For example, the ways that the transference or relational expectations that comes up may be influenced by the truth of their experience with us, rather than maybe more of a quote unquote blank slate that is there if the client has no former experience of us. Ready?
I'm not sure if I fully understood the question, but I'll give it a shot. That the first thing that comes to me is just speaking about it right off the bat. When someone wants to work with PSIP, wants to do PSIP with me, then I have them go through a few different resources first, videos and articles, and this panel discussion will start to be one of those things. I really want them to be so informed and prepared. So that's what comes up for me first, is just getting right into the psychoeducation and right into the ways the work will or could unfold.
I'm not sure if I understood the question exactly either, but one piece I think that you were asking, Katie, is about how do we handle it when, we show up as human beings and we make a mistake or maybe misattuned or, whatever. And I just own it, right? If it's really clear, okay, that was my part, then I'll just own it and apologize if that seems like it's appropriate. That's if we're working on solution, right? If you're working in negative transference, you might work with that a little bit differently. But yeah, for the most part, that's what I would do.
Just say that as a couples therapist, I worked as a couples therapist with them, and one of them wants to work with me individually. I've tried that several times, and that that transition's been awkward. So I'm not sure if anybody else is in that situation, but one reason why it's been awkward is because as they're doing their own trauma healing work, it can destabilize things in the relationship. And so then they're like needing me back to be their couples therapist. And I can't go back there once I've really, formed that individual alliance. So anyway, I've stopped now working with couples clients doing individual, even if they think everything's fine and good and they're stable and their partner's totally into it. And people have asked now, can we both do it with you at the same time? And anyway, it gets really complex there. So
let's maybe go to the next question, G. You're muted.
Sorry. Actually, we don't have any more questions. So if anybody has more, you can feel free to either type it or raise your hand. We can
Claire has her hand
ask
up. Claire, I don't know if it's still up, but Claire Carpenter.
Okay, let's see. Not seeing any hands right here, but if anybody would like to ask live, then just raise your hand and we can just can let you talk and ask your question live.
Okay. Well, we left. Go ahead, Eric.
I need to get going as well.
Yeah.
I have a session coming up.
Yeah, I was. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was going to say for all of us, if we left a half an hour at the end of this for a Q&A, and if people have a Q&A, then we're happy to hang out and go into it. But if there isn't a Q&A, then I think we could wrap up. But so let's maybe leave a couple of minutes here just to see if questions bubble up. But Eric, thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.
I have a transference joke to leave you with, which is just notice what happens when I exit.
something we haven't mentioned that's interesting transferentially is if there's two therapists there.
Yeah.
And that can really allow the different splitting of transferential roles to happen more overtly. And recently had that in a training we did, right? A co-instructor there. And so immediately, for whatever reason, there was negative transference for that person. It came up much faster than I think it ever would have if they'd been the sole person. And then splitting happened where then I got to be the good one for whatever reason, which is always nice because often it's the other way. But we played with that. And what was really powerful was the idea that we could both be there. They didn't have to choose. She didn't have to choose and make one wrong and one right. Once we could play with that as well, that ultimately to having two people there was a huge solution. Didn't have to make one person the problem, but leaning into that, it's great when you get two therapists. We can play with it even more overtly, I think.
Okay. Thank you for that, Robin. We're now getting a bunch of really interesting questions. So thank you folks for sending in those questions. We have one from a student of ours, from Megan. And let's see. Megan asks, if we're thinking about redoing part A, which is the 5-day in-person training that we do, where students also receive sessions as part of their training, would you recommend that we try to choose an instructor based upon the transference reaction they seem to provoke within us? In other words, should we challenge ourselves by choosing an instructor that seems to foreshadow the most negative transference? Or should we choose someone we feel more attuned to and trust that the negative transference will emerge enough?
That's a great question. I love it.
Who asked that question?
It's Megan
Okay.
Beckley.
Megan, who's the baddie? I'm just curious. Okay, you don't have to say. You don't have to say. But what do you guys think?
I think it depends on, and it may be hard to know, but right, does your system at this point need solution, or are you ready to go into the negative transference? You may need more correctives, more solution internalized into your system, right, before you're ready to go in full throttle into the negative transference. And if so, then of course you'd want to choose somebody, right, who you feel that, right, who you sense can meet those relational needs that we're missing.
Okay. No, I think that's a great answer, right? Like where are you on the spectrum between needing more nightmare or needing more solution, right? If you have enough solution internalized, then yeah, go for it, right? Go for the negative transference.
Thank you for that, Jackie. And I just want to say real quick, I think for one, that's such a good question. And I think that's the point of why we do these, one of the points of why we do these panel discussions and why we've been inviting more of our instructors on board with our live online events, because I think it helps people, prospective applicants, students, to have a better sense of the instructors and the team behind PSI. So it's not just Saj that people get to know, but everybody, because everybody has different backgrounds and everybody, works differently. But so thank you for that, Megan, for that question.
Can I just say something before we go on to the next question? Because I don't know why, but something got pinged a memory got pinged in my head. And I was running a training with Jackie, and Jackie was running the session, and there was this magical piece of negative transference that you ended up holding, Jackie, that I wanted to recount here, where the student was close to you, I think, like looking right into your eyes and just really saying, I really need your help here. I really need you to answer this question for me. It was something like that. She was asking you something. And then, was just looking for it. And I think Jackie's intuition was no, we need more nightmare, right? And Jackie would repeat back to this person, you really need me to answer this question for you, don't you? And then the student reset it again, and like three or like four times, and Jackie just held her ground. It was a beautiful piece of like not of continuing to allow that the non-answer that would have taken away from that from deepening into the negative transference. Yeah. So, all right. And we had a hand up. Gail had a hand up.
Yeah, I did see that. Okay, Gail's right here. So we're gonna do allow to talk. Hi, Gail.
Hi, thank you so much for this. I was typing away. In experiential play therapy, this is helpful to compare it because that's the world I kind of started with. And there's this progression that you'll watch a kid go through as they play out the therapist being in the bad guy role and then whatever, all the different roles. And I was just wondering if there's a similar progression that PSIP clients go through in their work. I haven't heard it talked about in that way, or if it's just fragmented, not fragmented, but just coming in different ways at different times. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think it varies a lot in someone's process, but I can think of one person where first it was trying to hold on to me as a savior, but then very much, became the perpetrator, distance, distance, distance. And then after a long time working with that, it became bystander. Like I could just be there and witness, but I couldn't help. I'm still pretty useless, but at least the witnessing was allowed. At first it was grabbed onto, but it wasn't real. It wasn't really landing. And then there was that. And then only after, those layers could there be, and then we still went back and forth of allowing, actual connection, support. And I think that's very individual.
And maybe with the age, with all the defenses that get built up through the years, maybe that makes more sense. Whereas kids don't, if they're in a safe place, they typically move through it. Yeah, just faster, a lot faster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You guys
what I've
weren't
noticed,
necessarily watching a process that you're like, oh, now they might likely go into this space or whatever. That's not something that's common in PSIP.
I just wanted to
no,
comment that on what you said there, Gail, about the speed that children move into this. Again, children are primary consciousness, right? We don't see the development of secondary consciousness until about the age of 9. So what you're seeing in a child's mind, this is why we started off with Maja talking about play therapy, is I think this is how we would be, how fluid we could be in this space of processing transference, of processing relational wounding, if we didn't have all the inhibiting factors of secondary consciousness mind, all the censorship mechanisms, all the management strategies that we've developed. It takes time to really get there. When you're doing classic psychoanalytic work, you could be 3 sessions a week for years and years and years, and eventually the transference will really start like making its way to the surface. The transference with medicine on board is right there. I mean, you just scratch at the surface of it, and the door opens up. There's an entire universe of negative transference, of relational failings that are waiting for the therapist to work with them. So there's an incredible opportunity here, akin to what you're describing with children.
yeah, I just want to agree with validate what Saj is saying. Like working with kids is so much easier because they don't have that top-down imprisonment that emerges, that contains it all. And so they're just primary, they're just spilling it out. and they have this bottom-up intuitive sense that they trust. So they have that interpsychic solution, right? Trusting their own nervous system and their imagination, the imaginal realm. But they also have this relational safety. They sort of still have certain innocence to them that adults are somewhat safe when they're younger. So you have both a bottom-up and trust in their nervous system, and I think for many, not all kids that young, but they do tend to have more relational. So you don't have as much armor to work against. So they do move through things so much faster.
Thank you. Yeah. So that answers it pretty much. Yeah.
And this is why, like, I've always wondered, like, how come adults need to like a sledgehammer of using such strong medicines or to get underneath the hood? Is because of that secondary consciousness, right? That's why we don't have to give medicines to children, because they're so primary and bottom up and feel relationally safe. But that doesn't happen with adults. There's so much armor, so the medicine helps lift the armor so that we can get underneath into the kid inside.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gail, for that question. Next up, we've got Jennifer. Jennifer asks, can you say more about the dark side of the savior archetype?
Go read the book, Power in the Helper Professions. That one is a very excellent book to help understand the negative side to start. Go ahead, Jackie. I think you're going to say something.
Yeah, well, I mean, if there's a really strong urge to come and rescue, right, that can be extremely unhelpful, right? Sometimes that's a good thing, right? Especially if you're working on building out solution. But if you're working with somebody in the negative transference, that can absolutely undermine the whole process, right? Because you want them to re-experience what it was like to not be rescued, right? For the savior to come in, right? And take away all their pain or protect them, unlike, the caregiver did. So yeah, that's the first thing that comes to my mind about it.
I don't know, for whatever reason, but this one is like something that this topic in terms of transference is something that really interests me. I think that it's potentially devastating for the client when their therapist hogs the positive transference roles. And I mean that word, hogging, right? So, which is to say that it doesn't mean the negative transference roles goes away. It just means that it goes to somebody else. It's not being welcomed in the therapy room, right? So the therapist is the good, idealized parent, and then the client goes home and they have all these negative transferential roles for their partner, and their partner has no idea what's going on here. So I talk about this in the Part B lecture in the training, but we tend to have, I think individual therapy oftentimes does break up relationships, and we have a theory, we have a story that we tell ourselves around that, which is to say that, we say, oh, my client chose to grow and their partner didn't grow, and so they grew apart, right? So that really can be a possibility of something that happens. The other thing that could be happening is that, the therapist is unconsciously, again, hogging that positive role because it is so delicious, right? It is so resourcing for us for people to see us that way. We want to be seen that way, especially if you grew up in the caretaker role in your family. So that means that, the negative roles go to the partner, and the other person doesn't know what to do with it. I think this is even more, so I'll put it this way. It's devastating enough when this happens in traditional therapy, right? Because then it's like you get the real positive parental transference there. But I think it's far worse when it happens in psychedelic therapy, because it's not just the positive parental transference that's going to the guide or the shaman or the psychedelic therapist. It's sort of existential levels of savior that go there, right? So in other words, that this person is now the mouthpiece of God, right? This person is representative of a loving universe, which the client or the participant may never have experienced before. And so they just become sort of an idealized figure. They get put on a pedestal. And then when you go home, it's like, yeah, like it's not just the negative family dynamic then, it's just this whole existential thing that where, your negative versions of the world then you take home with you, right? So I think it is incumbent upon therapists that if we're going to be working in, family of origin, complex trauma situations with people, particularly with medicine, we have to be willing to bring the negative transference into the therapy room. Right? If we don't, you're gonna wreck your client's life outside of your relationship with them, which will be great, but you're gonna, their marriage is gonna suffer, all sorts of other relationships are gonna suffer in this person's life. Yeah.
And the client just one thing, and then the client may then fall into managing the relationship with you, right? Knowing or sensing, right, that you need to be the good parent in the good role, the savior, right? So then their management strategies may come in to maintain that relationship.
Yeah, if there's anything that I see as a therapeutic industry that can do severe damage, it's this over-identification with the savior role. And because if you are fully owning the savior role, then the disowned part, right, could be the victim or the perp, right, or the bystander, whatever it is, it's disowned, gets projected out onto your client. And so here you have a dynamic that will never heal. If you are constantly needing to be the hero, then someone in your life has to be the other dialectic. And if that's your client, then you're stuck. Your client can never emerge. You'll stay in this bind, especially if the client comes forward as really overdeveloped into a victim role, right? And really owning and identifying that, and to a point of gaining power over it, you two will be stuck forever in therapy. So it can be, I'm just validating what Jackie and Saj are saying, is like it can be a devastating dynamic if you're not conscious of it.
I have a mantra that I learned from one of my apprentices, and I always keep in mind. He said, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. I'm like, okay, I gotta be ready for that one all the time.
Yeah, if you think about it, one of the things I really like about the PSI is underneath a lot of helper savior roles is a deep sense of powerlessness, helplessness, right? I don't have the answers here. I don't have any solution here. I don't know what to do. I feel utterly, completely, gut-wrenchingly helpless. And so then we just resurrect more fake, false, like savior energy, and we convince the person that we have the answer, and underneath it is utterly complete helpless and hopeless. And I really like the PSI model because it goes after the jugular of that hopeless, helpless, powerless place that is often underneath the savior role, that's very much deep in dissociation, far in the recesses of the person's psyche, never to be found. And through cannabis work and through the appropriate pressurization, we can find it. We can go after it. And there's nothing more satisfying than that. Getting a clinician out of their savior role.
Yeah, we actively encourage our therapy, our clinicians who are our students, to really discover their own powerlessness, because it's probably there, right? And I like how you put that, Maja, that the stronger the savior, the stronger the shadow of the savior, right? Which is either victim or perpetrator, or it's one of the others, right?
You combine someone who has religious trauma, right? That's all of, like, if you're not just clinicians, you've got your pastors, like your priests, like doctors, all these professions are found, your police officers, law enforcement, extreme savior roles, your first responders, and what is the energy underneath it can be incredible. We have a whole society that is running from their helplessness and powerlessness and deep yeah, hopelessness. But within that hopelessness and powerlessness and lack of being able to save is where there's incredible creativity and life force. If we can give our nervous system permission to go there,
Mhm.
this is where there's so much generative energy.
Um, I just it occurred to me that you know, like the transference that we as a culture have onto doctors, right? Again, helping professions. Uh, and I remember there was some like documentary that I listened to, and it was talking about med students, and there's supposedly like a special tradition that they have when they get their white coats, and because we project onto the white coat, right? We project authority, we project competence, we project credibility onto a white coat, which is kind of interesting because that leads my mind to thinking about, well, what are inanimate projections that we tend to have, or inanimate transference that we tend to have? And this leads to sort of maybe a provocative thing to say, but I think we project onto the medicine all the time.
Yeah, I don't think that's provocative. I think that's like just like, duh. Yep, what we
Yeah,
do.
yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, we project savior onto medicines. And actually, the more illegal something is, the more that it feels like the government doesn't want you to have it, the better it must be, right? So,
I would almost say like, again, maybe this is provocative, but like our nation is obsessed with supplements, organic food, right? We are obsessed with health. And so where is the savior role getting projected onto? It's like food is going to be my savior. I just have to eat correctly. These supplements are going to be my savior. This medicine is going to be my savior. Again, I find it curious how much projection is being put out onto the world.
hmm.
And then marketers are like vultures exploiting that. Right?
Um, let's go with another question, Gene.
My gosh.
Maja's
Thank
getting
you, you
fired up
guys.
about.
I know. I know, and I'm so grateful to you guys and to everybody that has stuck around with us this far. You know, we're almost at the
Oh
end
yeah.
here. We've got maybe like one more question that we can answer. And then, you know, in typical PSI event fashion, we'll just like do a follow-up video answering questions from you guys that we don't get to address here. But before our last question, I just want to let you guys know that on our chat box, I've shared the link to request that free 30-minute one-on-one consultation that I mentioned earlier during this event. And again, if you're a mental health professional or if you have a background in healing arts, you can request that free 30-minute consultation. And if you qualify, we'll get back to you right away and you can get that consultation. And there's no commitment to it. You don't have to like sign up for the training afterwards, you know, and it's really like you could use it as you know, if you're working with clients, whether it's with the trauma or psychedelics, you can use it as an informal supervisory consultation, or you can talk about your own personal process during this consultation, you know.
But it will make me, your father, sad if you don't sign up for the training.
There you go.
I hope we can have fun with transference. Um,
Yeah.
okay, all right. Well, we're pretty much at the end here, so why don't we wrap it up?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, as I've said, we have a few more questions, but we'll get to those questions in our follow-up mm, recording. And also, the recording for this will be live on our YouTube channel, so just stay tuned. And yeah, thank you so much, you guys, for sharing your insights and you know even your own personal experiences with the model, with transference, and for just for being with us here today. Thank you so much. And to everyone that attended and spent their last 2.5 hours with us. Thank you so much. And we hope this inspired you to explore more about what PSI and PSIP is all about. All those resources are available on our
Oh,
website.
can
Yes,
I
Aj.
mention there's a fantastic podcast recording that I
Mhm.
did with Craig Heacock on his show Back from the Abyss. It's the Natasha episode. I don't know which one it is, but maybe you can find it, Jean, and post it in the chat box. Highly recommend you listen to it. It is all about it's audio of a ketamine session that with sustained eye contact, and it really heads into negative transference territory. We pause the session and go into the theory of it, and then restart the session at times. So, I think that's a great resource. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. I just put the link to that one in the chat box, but I will also be setting a follow email after we conclude this event, where you can sign up for that 30-minute consultation, and you can also watch that or listen to that podcast episode that Saj just mentioned. But yeah, I guess that's it. Thank you again so much, you guys, our PSI instructors.
Yeah.
For anyone that's interested in training with any one of our instructors, we have their trainings listed on our website, and you get to pick who you want to work with, who you want to be mom, who you want to be dad. It's up to you. Hopefully this helps.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending. Thank you to the team. All right. Take care.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
guys.